Hi, I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick, and today we're going to give some very practical advice. Now, where is this practical advice coming from? We'll get to that in a second, but first and foremost, to the people who listen to this podcast, thank you for continuing to listen. You give me a reason to stare into a camera and jabber into a microphone. It is much appreciated on my end. Now, my practical advice today comes from a YouTube rabbit hole I went down last night. First of all, don't do it. Second of all, if you do it, I have to separate those two do's very carefully. You may notice a lot of videos of interactions with police officers. They're very popular videos. They show up in the shorts a lot, in the YouTube shorts. You may notice these videos. First and foremost, yes, absolutely. To those of you wondering, there are absolutely laws that restrict how and when the police can detain you, when they can search your person, when they can search your home, those sorts of things. There are also rules of what they can do at traffic stops, when they can pull you over, and when they pull you over, when they can extend that farther by not just pulling you over, but by searching your vehicle. So keep those in mind, right? And those, you can easily look those up. However, I'm going to give you some practical advice today. Because here's the thing. All those laws and regulations and even the constitutional rights that are not given to us by the Bill of Rights, but they are enshrined in the Bill of Rights. They're stated explicitly in the Bill of Rights. Those are kind of after the fact protections. Like holding up a copy of the Constitution in the moment it's not magic. Like you can't just go, I have the Fourth Amendment right here, and it's going to magically stop everything. It should, but what it amounts to is creating a basis for a legal claim later on. Now, I'm not saying that police officers shouldn't be trained. They absolutely should be. The majority of police officers that I have interacted with, and bear in mind, yes, for my more liberal-minded friends, this is coming from an Irish Lebanese person, so I am what they call a white boy, for what that's worth. Keep in mind that that's where this information is coming from. I'm also a trained lawyer. At a traffic stop, it does you no good. We'll start with the most basic thing. At a traffic stop, it does you no good to be a dick. It does you no good. Because in the best case scenario, you just pissed off a cop. And why are you going around trying to piss people off? So, your best thing that you can do at a traffic stop is to be exceedingly polite. Exceedingly polite. Now, you should know your rights. You should also know what your rights don't include. At a traffic stop, and there are several types of traffic stops, but let's say you're just pulled over, the police officer is going to ask you a series of questions. If the police officer has pulled you over and has pulled you over for a taillight or has pulled you over for a suspicion of speeding, guys, I'm sorry. You can argue with the cop till you're blue in the face, but they're going to get your license and registration. License, proof of insurance, and registration. Those are things that cops can ask for when you are passing on the public motorways. Now, you can always contest a ticket, and you always should contest a ticket. At a traffic stop, you should never admit to anything. If a cop pulls you over and they say, do you know why they pulled me over today? Simply say, no, officer, I do not know. Well, you were speeding. I'm sorry you feel that way, officer. I'm sorry you believe that, officer. License, proof of insurance, and registration. Here you go. You had a tail light out. Officer, I had no idea. I still have no idea because I haven't gotten out to look at the tail light. So, just be polite. Be exceedingly polite. Because typically speaking, most officers are in the middle of a pretty dangerous job. Now, none of this is to excuse the poor behavior of cops when they escalate a situation that is a rude interaction on the road. None of that is to excuse that behavior. Remember, this is just purely practical advice. Sidebar, another bit of practical advice. Technically speaking, yes, you are allowed to stand on a public sidewalk and film random crap. But if you stand on a public sidewalk outside of a police station pointing a camera at the police station, questions are going to be raised. Especially if your camera is not labeled with a well-known news station number. That's why all those news stations have their labels on the cameras. That way you clearly know who they're working for. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to do it. It's just not a good idea. You have the right of way as a pedestrian when you cross inside of a crosswalk. But if you step in front of a truck moving 70 miles an hour, your right of way does not save you from being dead. In general, when you're interacting with a police officer, when you're interacting with law enforcement of any kind, if they're coming up to you, generally speaking, they believe they have a reason to come up to you. Now, the reason may be bad. The reason may not be a strong reason. It may not be a reasonable suspicion. At no point does it benefit you to not comply with a police officer's order, because that is typically when the situation escalates. And I hate that I have to give this advice, and I hate that the advice tends to be, it just tends to be colored. I hate that the advice tends to be skewed against Black and brown Americans. I hate that. But when a police officer interacts with you, detains you, pulls you over, even if they are in the wrong, it behooves you to be polite, but to be firm. I don't consent. I don't consent to a search, and I want a lawyer. Ask for a lawyer immediately. And if an officer tells you that you need to get on the ground, continue asking for a lawyer, but comply. Complying with an officer's order does not mean you are admitting guilt. It does mean that you have a lick of intelligence about yourself and that you're going to do what you can to get home safe that night. Look, in a lot of places and in a lot of ways, the situation and the relationships between police officers and civilians, it has gotten unnecessarily confrontational, and it has escalated a lot. Places like Buffalo, New York have a lot of great community groups that are specifically geared towards helping bridge the gap between police and civilians, but not everywhere. If you want to look into it in Buffalo, New York, look into a man named Pastor James Giles. He is an incredible man. He runs a number of organizations, including the Buffalo Peacemakers, who are dedicated to helping bridge the gap between when police officers are needed and when a situation can be de-escalated. But your advice, if you are to interact with a police officer in a situation where a police officer is pulling you over or interacting with you on the street, always say, "Am I under arrest? And if you are under arrest, I want a lawyer," but be polite and comply. And keep a record in your head, because at some point you will be able to assert that they violated your rights, and the violation of your rights will be a civil lawsuit against the police officers. But it does you no good to antagonize the police. It does nobody any good. The police need a lot of corrections, but those corrections come typically after the fact. It's not great. It's not a perfect system, but it is the system that's currently in place. We'll work to improve that system together, but for now, remember, be polite, comply with the orders, ask for a lawyer. That's the best advice I got. If you have any better advice, leave it in the comments. And obviously, this is a 10-minute podcast, so I couldn't get into the nuances of the situation. Don't be afraid. If you have excuse me, if you keep a spine about you and keep your head about you, you'll be fine. I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. Hoping for a more peaceful future. Have a great day.